Hey everybody, this is the course of a video about how to release emotions or what's going on in the body. I'm going to make a little video about why that's important, everything here within our course. In the Japanese culture, I think it was called Jing. In the Indian culture, it's called samskaras. And in the US culture, it's kind of tied into the biblical thing of generational curses. And what this is that, I don't claim to be a priest or a pastor. I'm not trying to get any religious stuff. I strictly want to speak to you about the neurology of this and what's coming out as far as emotions go. So it's actually starting to be shown that there's a company out there called HeartMath, and they found out you have about a 9 foot radius of electricity that surrounds you. This is also evident if you've ever had an EKG done, where the electricity comes out of your body. That's what the EKG is. It's actually electrical field that's coming out of your body. Now, eventually, I think what's going to happen is that could be the evidence of what's called the aura or things like that. But what's really interesting is that our thoughts and our emotions, it seems like are actually particles. Thoughts are things, and that's what's actually coming out. So when you make a thought, there's an electrical charge that happens. That charge goes into the atmosphere, so to speak, or some people call it the ether or whatever they might call it. And then within that field, it looks like it collects there. Now, here's the interesting thing is that if you look at the way a hard drive is made, it's a rotating magnetic field. And the way Earth is, it has a north and south pole, and it's a rotating magnetic field as well. And if you look at the way DNA works, it's actually a rotating magnetic field. In fact, now it's being shown that DNA, I believe, stores depending on the computer, but it stores about the memory of 215,000 computers. And so what that's telling you, if you look at like how DNA stores information, a strand of DNA can store so much information, it's astronomical. I don't claim to be a computer person, but if you look at how many terabytes it is, it's astronomical amount. But what I'm getting to is the way hard drives store memory, the way planets actually should store memory as well, the way they rotate. And DNA actually is being shown that it can actually store memory. Now, when you make a thought, it appears that it may be stored in the DNA or the cells of how they rotate magnetically. So, what I want you to understand is that the way a memory works in a computer is very similar to how DNA works. In fact, DNA has now been proven to store memory and it can store things, stores data, things like that. Now, the thing that I think is eventually going to be proven is that, and I think this is getting there too, but the old traditions were is that our emotions were stored in our body or our DNA, our cells, cellular programming, things like that. There's a really interesting video by a lady I admired. Her name was Caroline Corey, where she did a study on DNA at, I believe it was Stanford or something. Anyways, it's in a movie called Superhuman. I think it's on Amazon and it's free. But anyways, they just showed that thought could change DNA. It changes the electricity of DNA. So if you take that further and you understand how memory affects DNA and how DNA affects storage, the electricity actually of your mind and your thoughts influences the way that hard drive works. I'll explain more and more of this, but what I want you to understand is that theoretically, it's not too far of a stretch to understand that your thoughts are charged potentials. And those charged potential, just like how a circuit board works, or if you look into how a computer works to store memory, how the hard drive works, it's actually a very similar schematic to how the brain is. The brain has a neurological synapse, has neurological capacity, it makes an electrical charge, and then that charge, theoretically, I think, is stored in the DNA. Now, this goes back to the old thoughts of like, how does it possible that things can be transferred down to DNA from mother to kids, etc.? Now, if that charge in that DNA is around that baby or that person, it could actually be transferred in. This is also how I think behavior is transferred to people and who you hang around with, you tend to act like, is because that vibration, that type of energy is stored in the heart of that person. Now, the crazy thing is when you talk to DNA, as far as it's going back about Caroline's study, is that DNA tends to respond to what you speak to it about, and it actually intention and things like that. So I'm going to have you do a little experiment here, and I want you to understand. So as far as neurological speaking, I'm not trying to get religious or be anything like that. The basic thing is that it's proven that DNA stores memory. The way hard drives works, very similar to your DNA, and the electrical charges of the computer base are actually like the brain or the thoughts, the emotive type of function of the body. And then your language, your words and stuff seem to have some influence It could be, the vibration of the words, the speaking of the words can actually influence and be stored in that hard drive of the DNA. I think DNA is actually a storage tank of the body, and that's not too far of a stretch. You can actually read about this. But your thoughts, your emotions, and all those things, I believe, are stored in your DNA. And then people you're around can go in and out of the DNA based on who you're around. As we know, we emit frequencies out of our heart. So when you come into the different fields of different people, there's information in that electricity that can actually be transferred over into the DNA of other people. So hopefully this makes sense. If you study all this scientifically, it makes perfect sense how that could happen. Now, the wild thing that's actually shown, the reason I talk about this study from Caroline is that when you talk to your DNA or you speak to your DNA, it actually changes the electrical field of your thoughts and your emotions. And again, that's proven at a university study. In her video, they actually show that the DNA can actually change based on your thoughts. So it's almost like changing the charge on a computer, but that's the first piece I want you to understand. Now, the second piece is when people talk about stuff, they'll say things like their mother, their father, they'll touch certain spots on their body. Those spots that they are touching actually are what I believe are the meridians. There was a thing called the Callahan technique, emotional freedom technique, which is a bunch of meridian points that most people know that they tapped on. But what happens is that when people talk about something, you're going to see they'll touch one of those points when they're talking. That's typically the area you want to touch. So, but I'm going to have you do an experiment is that it turns out that our language is able to influence DNA. And that's what, if you look at Caroline's video, you're going to see that as well in that university study, is that how you speak actually creates and changes your DNA. So what you talk about actually has an influence, the words that you speak about. So in a general suggestion, what I want you to see is that if I said something like, um, I asked to release all the sadness from every cell in my DNA, conscious, subconscious, cellular memories now. If I did something like that, you will notice that you start to feel lighter. Now, if the DNA has more load on it, it typically has mass and weight. And so the electrical charges out of the brain could actually be weighting into the DNA. And I do believe now that the DNA is your storage container of your body, of your emotions and thoughts. But I believe organs and glands in the body and your field can actually store things too. But what I want to suggest for you for the first part is ask to release all the sadness from your DNA and see how you feel. You can pray to release it, let it go, but you can see that if you command it to be released, you actually do feel lighter. Now, what's being shown is that when you speak about things, that it go. Now, this is how it used to be said that individuals, from what I understand anthropologically, they never went through counseling one on one until they cleared all their family issues first. And the reason is if there's something what they called samskaras, generational curses, Jing, what they called in the Japanese culture, if I get that word right, from my understanding, that is actually that the storage of emotions from our parents. Now, psychological studies have proven this. There's studies on Holocaust victims. There's a study on mice. I believe they gave them cherries. And then the next generations down, and they shocked them every time they ate a cherry, I believe is what it was, something like that. And all the other generations were afraid of cherries, and they never even saw one in their life. But the emotions appear to be transferred down. I believe they're transferred through the memory storage tank of the DNA. And I believe the DNA is also somewhat of a storage, it's a memory of your life. And I believe that that's going to come out as possibly true too. Eventually, I think we're going to be able to look at DNA and we're going to be able to see everything that happened in your life from that DNA. Someone's going to figure out how to extract the information from DNA, and they're going to be shocked to realize they can probably figure out everything that person actually went through. And I believe this will change the series of courts and law and legal stuff and everything. And you can actually store everything from someone's life in those strands of those DNA. That's not a far stretch. It makes perfect sense if you understand how hard drives work, how DNA stores memory. The piece this video is about is I want you to speak to your DNA and ask and command it to release the emotions of sadness, fear. But if there's anything like, say, my family apparently on my mother's side went through World War II in Hungary. And I never heard too much about what this. I know my grandfather was involved in the Korean War. And so there's certain things there. So as you speak about something, you can actually command. And then what I want you to notice is that you will typically notice you feel lighter. Now, if you feel lighter, that's a different thing that tends to happen. So the points, they're called Callahan points, but there's meridians. When someone talks, they're going to touch a certain point on their body when they talk about that emotion. I want you to track it and see 10 or 20 times does that happen every time they talk about it? Do they touch the same point? So, for example, every time someone talks about their mother, do they touch their lungs every time they talk about their mother? What that is that that's where that emotion is stored. It's stored in the lung. And so, because you're going to notice if someone keeps touching there every time they talk about it, that's what it is. So, if there's a point you touch when you speak about your grandfather, your mother, your family, you're going to tap that area. So, if I said my grandfather was in the Korean War and I touched here, my example would be I command my subconscious to release and remove all of my grandfather's pain, suffering, sadness, isolation, despair, all the negative emotions from my DNA, from my conscious, subconscious, cellular memories now, and command it to be released from your DNA. And it turns out that your language actually changes the DNA. So command it to be released and it lets go. So the wild part about this is it appears that what you tell your DNA, it does. So you are the controller of your DNA, not someone else. So you can tell it to release things or let go of things or do this or that, but you have to have the intent and the purpose. And that's what that study with Caroline showed at the, I believe, Stanford University, one of those universities where they actually measured the DNA and they found out your mind can control your DNA. And so what I want you to do is to release the samskara. You tap on the area that you touch when you talk about it. And so, for example, if I said something like, I ask and intend to release and remove my father's belief uh, that money is bad from my DNA, from my conscious, subconscious, cellular memories now. And I would tap like this and I would release it. I'm going to give you more videos about certain commands and stuff, but basically what you do is if you know a story about your family, you speak to your body and you can just feel and you say, I command this emotion to be released out of my DNA. Now, the words were specific for the changes in the DNA that I've seen. And in Caroline's study, I saw like it was the intention focused on that thing. So I want you to command your language and your power to release those thoughts from that DNA. Tell your body to release the emotion from the DNA, from the glands, from the organs, and then just simply observe if you feel lighter. Now, what the samskara thing is, or what they call Jing in the Japanese, or supposedly, I believe, generational curses of stuff in the biblical thing, is that these carrying of these energies in the DNA actually influence how someone's life turns out. It's extremely important to release them. And what I also want you to notice is if you release, say, an event from your family. I see this a lot in there's a Chinese guy that was in his family was involved in the U.S. in a slavery camp, and it was something like he just didn't know why. Like he was like so against slavery and stuff and all these things, and he was like, I don't understand. I have no connection to it. But then he couldn't make any money, and he just always felt like a slave, and so he released the samskara, commanded his great grandmother's anger about the Chinese concentration camps in the US. And then all of a sudden, he got a better job. Now, I will tell you this that wild things will happen in your life when you release samskaras or Jing or generational curses. But all he did was said that, and all of a sudden, his life opened up. He actually I believe he got fired from his job, but then the next week, he got an amazing job, made almost twice as much money. And we were just basically talking about how in his culture, this was done for years, and this was done before individual counseling. And this is what, if you read the psychology stuff coming out as well, that it's being shown that we actually transfer emotions down from our family. So if someone has like an inability to connect in relationships or something from a family member 3 generations back, all the individual counseling, according to ancient traditions, isn't going to do anything until they release the emotions from the grandmother. And so, but those emotions are shown to be released through your language. You control your in and out memory storage tank of the DNA through your language. And so, what I want you to see is to just try tapping. I'll make a few more videos for you on this, but Just touch the area that you touch when you talk about a relative or something. And you can say, like, I command all my anger, frustration, and pain and suffering from my family going through World War II, of being taken advantage of not feeling listened to, of being stolen from. I command those emotions to be released from every cell in my DNA once and for all. And when you do that, you actually feel different. Now, what I want you to observe is that when you release it, does your life change? Now, this is the other strange part I make a video about is most people, when they release past emotions from their family, their life changes. And this is where the idea of generational curses, samskaras, Jing, all that stuff starts to make sense. Is that if your DNA is carrying some emotion from a family member, then how are you going to be able to function if that specific wavelength could be changing the vibration of how you think, how you operate your brain? All right, this is video one, and then I'm going to give you specific things after this, but make sure you watch this video first before doing the other ones.